So today I'm going to run through some development of concepts using Maya and taking these couple of sketches from Generation of Ideas and creating some 3D models. So in Maya, the first thing we're going to do when we start a new project is click New to create a new scene, and we're going to click File and create a project window, which will set up our folder structure. So it's important to make sure your current project, you click New. I will call this development of concepts. And what I'm going to do is click on this folder and select my desktop, and then down the bottom, accept. And what that will do on my desktop is it will create this development concepts folder that has all of these other subfolders within that we might use later on. Now, first of all, we can then save the scene, and this can be called my bottles scene. So to start with, we'll create this one on the left. So we have this rectangular, rounded, sort of beveled edge that's transparent, and it has this internal detail as well. To start with, up the top, we have our shapes that we can begin to work with. So we're going to work with this polygon cube and click on that. It's down here in the middle. I can press W, which is a shortcut for move, to move it up. The shortcut here for scale is R, and I can scale it out by grabbing the middle, which will scale it up. And because I want it to look slightly more rectangular rather than being a cube, I'm going to just drag that top one up a little bit as well. Now that I have that, what I need to do is round these corners off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and hold. And when you right click and hold, it allows you to select either face mode, vertex, or edge mode. I'm going to click edge because I want to select these 4 edges. And if I click on each of these and I'll hold down shift, and that will let me click on those 3. If I hold down alt and click, it will allow you to rotate around the object as well. So alt and click, hold down shift, select that back edge as well. That's all 4. And now Control B is bevel, and it will round that off and bring up this little menu box here where I can change my fraction. And I'm just going to set that at the moment to 0.3. So it's gone and just rounded it off nice and evenly like that. So what I want to do now is I want to create this lid on the top. So it's just in the middle. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and hold, and this time go to face mode. And when I click on this top face, it means now I can use this scale tool to scale it in or out and to change that size of the top, which I'm going to scale it slightly in just so it has a little bit of an angle. So now you can see it angles a little bit in at the top. And while it's in this scale mode, I'm going to hold down shift. And what that brings up is the extrude shortcut, which means that I can then click and drag that in, and it will extrude a face inside. Now, what I'm going to do is the exact same thing, but this time using the move tool. And that means that if I still select that middle face, I can hold down shift and I can drag that face up as well for my lid. Now, once it's extruded, I can move it around as much as I want. I can drag it in, I can drag it out. We don't need to do it again, but I'm going to just extrude that, and then same thing, back to my scale tool, and I'm just going to scale it in slightly as well. So now it has a little bit of a lid on top, and that's the basis of that shape that I'm creating over here. So now for this internal chamber, what I'm going to do is go right click and hold and select object mode. So I can move this object around and I can select the whole thing. So for the chamber, I'm going to Control D and duplicate that. So now I've actually made a copy of it. I've got a copy which I can scale. So if I scale it down, it's now inside, but we can't see it obviously. So to be able to see that, I'm going to apply a material to my outside shape. So to do that, if I go to face mode, I can just click and drag and it will select all of those faces on either side. So I'm just alt clicking around to rotate. That will select all the faces within that area. And to add a transparent material, I can right click and hold and go down to assign new material. For this, I'm going to use a blend, which means that it is reflective. And once I click on blend, over here on the right hand side, it opens up our attribute editor, and I can change the color by double clicking and selecting whatever color I want. So let's go a bright pink, done. And now with this transparency, if I drag this little menu up, I can now see that inside bottle that I have as well. So at the moment that's disappeared. If I click back on here, if I right click and hold and go down to material attributes, I can always open that up to modify that color as well. So we don't need to keep applying new materials. We can just adjust it there. And what I'm going to do over on this left-hand side is click on PCube2 to select the inside one. And what I'm actually going to do is use a shortcut, which is Control-1. And that only shows that object that you've selected. So it's hidden the pink one and it's only selected this one here, because the last thing I'm going to do is go back to face mode. I'm going to click on this top face, press move, and just push that back down so it's flat. So I don't want that to be sticking up. I just want it to be flat. And once again, I'll go to object mode, click on my object. I want to change this entire material. So I'll go down to assign new material again. And the inside of this, once again, can be a blend. Over here, the color this time, I'll just make it a white color. So it's just going to be pure white. The transparency can stay 100%. Maybe you can fade it slightly. And if I press Control-1 again, it will now add that other object around the outside. So I've got PCube1 and PCube2. If I double click on PCube1, that is model1 underscore exterior. PCube2 is model1 underscore interior. And that's one model done. So I can select all of it by clicking and dragging and move it out of the way. That's our first quick little concept finished. Now, the second one is where we're going to still use a rectangle and we're going to divide it up using edge loops. So the same process, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click on Polygon Cube. I'm going to move it up, press R for scale and scale it up. And very, very similar, stretch it vertically as well. Now, if I press F, it will focus me on that object. So if I click over here and press F, it will focus me on this. And if I hold down Alt and click, I'll rotate around that object. If I click over here, press F, I will now rotate around this object as well by Alt and clicking. The next tool we're going to use is the Edge Loop tool. And if you hold down Shift, right click, it's just here on that left-hand side. And if we click this little checkbox and let go, it will open up these tool settings. And what we're going to use is we're going to use multiple edge loops, and I'm going to add in 8. So I can change that number to whatever I want. We're going to keep it nice and simple and enter 8 edge loops. And that means that if I click on this vertical edge of my shape, it will add in those lines. Now with the edge loop tool, at the moment, on this left-hand side where you've still selected it, we need to make sure we go back to the select tool up the top. Otherwise, we'll just keep adding edges. So go back to the select tool. I'll click on the background to deselect. And now we can select using that edge mode, right click and hold edge mode, select all of these. So for the top, I'll hold down Shift and I'll click on each of those edges. And what I'm now going to do is go back to scale and scale them in slightly. Same with these next ones. The shortcut I'm going to use now is hold down Shift, and you can see that little plus button appears, and if I double click, it will select all of those edges automatically. So this one can be scaled in slightly. I'll click on the background to deselect, Shift, double click. This one can be scaled out slightly. Click on the background, Shift, double click. This one can come back in, Shift, double click. This one can come right in, click on the background, and I'll go around and start to just nice and evenly build up this rounded shape. And I'll make the bottom slightly bigger than the top. And on the bottom, we need to do it manually. So I'll click on the bottom edge, hold down Shift, and click on each of those and make that a bit smaller. So at the moment, we have this, and it's quite geometric and hard-edged. So I'll go back to object mode. The shortcut we're going to use is Smooth Preview, which is 3 on the keyboard. So if you press number 3, it will do a preview of what this object looks like smoothed. And so now we can see that we have that kind of shape. But I want the middle here to be a little bit thinner. So back at Maya, I'm going to press 1 to unsmooth it. I'm going to click on the object, right-click and hold, and go Edge Mode. Once again, Shift, double-click, and I'm going to bring that center one in a little bit more. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to just click and drag over the top of my object. So I've selected all of the edges on top, and I'm going to press Move and just move these up slightly. So I'm going to stretch those out a little bit and just extend that. And now when I go back to object mode, press 3, now we have a little bit of a thinner middle there, middle section. Okay, and so this isn't smoothed at the moment, it's in preview. If I press 1 and go back to my object to finalize that smoothing, we can go Shift, right click, and click this smooth tool here and let go. Now we want to keep the divisions as simple as possible. So that's still a little bit too hard edged. I'm going to drag it up to 2 divisions. So click and drag on that word. Now we've got a lot nicer edges, and that's pretty good. Finally, we want to create our little button. So I can go right click and hold face mode, click and hold down Shift and select those 4 faces at the top. And the same as before, I need to extrude these by using the Move tool, holding down Shift and pulling that up slightly. And the same as before, I'll go then to my Scale tool, and I can scale those 4 faces in slightly as well to just create that idea of our button on top. And then, same as before, we can always go and use the face mode to add materials, but for now, I'll just go and leave it as grayscale. And now we have our 2 bottle ideas coming along. For the third one, what we have is this very geometric shape, and all this will require is an edge loop through the middle that we can then pull in and tighten up a little bit. So the exact same, using the polygon cube, moving it up, I'll move it across a little bit as well, and I'll press Scale, grab that middle Scale tool and scale it up, and I'll scale it up vertically as well by grabbing that top one. Now, if I hold down right click and Shift, I can click on my Insert Edge Loop tool little option box. And rather than using multiple this time, what we're going to do is we're going to just go relative distant from edge. And what this allows us to do is to click and drag on the edge of our object here and drop it wherever we want. So I just want it slightly above center. Keep the center of gravity a bit higher. I'll drop it there, close this tool down, and once again, make sure you use the Select tool. It is, if I click on the background, now has this edge loop the whole way around, and I can Shift, double click to select that entire edge again. I can now grab my Scale tool, pull that inwards. And if I do want to modify it, it's as easy as, say, using the move tool, and I can drag that up or down now as well to go and modify where that sits on my object. So over here, it's a slightly above center. I'll go back to Maya and pull it up a tiniest bit. And finally, the exact same as the previous ones, face mode. I'll click on my top face, press R for scale, hold down Shift and extrude it in. Then press W for move, hold down Shift, extrude it up, and press R for scale and just pull it in slightly. And we now have 3 concepts that we can start to work with and modify or render or add materials. Finally, what I could do as well is with these, I could always go and press spacebar. And what this brings up is our top, front, and side view. So if I go to my front view, press spacebar, and click on this object, I can change shading and set it to wireframe on shaded. And what that would do is put this blue outline around my object. And what I'll then go and do is go Windows Shift S, click and drag over that face, go to Illustrator, and I'll Alt and scroll and zoom out. On my artboards, I can go down the bottom and create a new one, Control V. So that is my front view. And my front view is also the same as my side view, so I'll copy and paste that as well. And last of all, for the top view, when I go back to Maya, spacebar, and go to my top view, and what it's done here is it's got lighting and it's all shadowed. So under the lighting option, I can go use flat lighting. That means the whole object is lit up and we can't see the object, the lines and details, because we need to change shading to wireframe on shaded. That will then show us all of those details, which I can Windows Shift S, go and select again into Illustrator, Control V, scale down, and at the moment, we'll just do it by eye, line it up, and we have a third angle orthogonal coming around. And last of all, just for aesthetic, I can drag a rectangle over my entire page, press the eyedrop tool, and select that grey colour, right click, arrange, send to back, and I have a third angle orthogonal of my object. And I could print this and I could go and render it and colour it in, or draw labels and go and add the details to it, or I could do it digitally as well and start to create a third angle orthogonal fully rendered design. And from that, we have our generation of ideas into a 2-dimensional concept and into a 3-dimensional concept, which we can modify as well.